The criminal inside. Faces of the criminal mind. When we think of a criminal, certain names immediately surface from the collective memory of society. Ted Bundy, the charming serial killer who lured and murdered dozens of women. Al Capone, the ruthless gangster who transformed prohibition into an empire of blood and money. Anders Breivik, the Norwegian extremist whose cold-blooded massacre stunned the modern world. These individuals were not simply lawbreakers, they became cultural archetypes, embodiments of the dark questions about human nature. How does someone choose crime? What thought patterns lead to murder, corruption, or terror? And perhaps more disturbingly, why do we, as ordinary people, find ourselves both repulsed and fascinated by their stories? Cinema mirrors this duality. Consider the haunting smile of Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck in Joker 2019, slowly unraveling from a struggling clown into a violent symbol of chaos. Or the calculated, eerie calm of Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, inviting us to peer into a mind that kills with intelligence rather than impulse. Movies and history alike teach us that criminals are not born with a label on their forehead. They are shaped, twisted, and driven by forces psychological, philosophical, and social. And yet, there lingers a terrifying possibility. The criminal is not a distant other, but a potential hidden within all of us. This essay will journey into the mind of the criminal through the lens of psychology, philosophy, and sociology, while drawing upon cinematic examples that dramatize these ideas like living case studies. The goal is not only to dissect criminal behavior, but to illuminate why humanity itself remains endlessly captivated by crime, as if gazing into a mirror that reflects the shadows we prefer not to acknowledge. The criminal mind, psychological foundations. 1.1 Psychopathy, Sociopathy, and Personality Disorders. Criminal psychology has long revolved around the study of abnormal personality traits. Psychopathy, often measured through Hare's psychopathy checklist, describes individuals who display shallow emotions, lack empathy, manipulative charm, and an absence of remorse. Ted Bundy epitomized this category, appearing charismatic and intelligent while masking a monstrous reality. Bundy's interviews before his execution demonstrated his chilling ability to intellectualize murder, detaching himself emotionally from the atrocities he committed. Sociopathy, closely related, emphasizes environmental shaping, unstable childhoods, trauma, or exposure to violence. A sociopath might form attachments but disregards societal rules when those attachments are threatened. Consider Tony Montana in Scarface, driven by greed, pride, and a violent need to dominate, a sociopathic rise and fall shaped by the social environment of crime and poverty. Clinical psychology expands on these ideas by noting how antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, correlates with high recidivism. Studies show that 40–50% of incarcerated individuals meet criteria for ASPD. This does not mean all with the disorder become violent criminals, but it illustrates the overlap between personality structure and crime. 1.2 Neuroscience of Crime. Modern neuroscience adds a biological layer to the conversation. Studies using fMRI have revealed reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region tied to impulse control and moral reasoning, among violent offenders. Meanwhile, hyperactivity in the amygdala heightens aggression and fear responses. In a sense, the wiring of the brain can tilt a person toward criminal choices, blurring the line between free will and predisposition. The case of Phineas Gage, though not a criminal, is often cited. After a tamping iron pierced his frontal lobe, his personality shifted dramatically. Imagine such neurological accidents occurring subtly through genetics or development, creating predispositions for violence. Are we then to condemn the person or the brain? The 2002 film Minority Report poses a haunting question. If we could predict criminal behavior before it happened, based on neural patterns and probability, should we intervene? Are criminals truly free actors, or are they caught in the deterministic machinery of biology and environment? 1.3 Trauma and Environment. Beyond the brain, childhood trauma remains one of the strongest predictors of future criminality. Abusive households, neglect, and exposure to early violence foster internalized rage and desensitization to harm. In a 2016 meta-analysis, researchers found a strong correlation between adverse childhood experiences and later criminal behavior. Trauma not only wounds, it molds thought patterns, distorting empathy and normalizing aggression. Walter White in Breaking Bad may not have had an abusive past, but his transformation illustrates another environmental factor: economic despair and wounded pride. The criminal path, for him, emerged not from psychopathy, but from rationalization and gradual desensitization. His story underscores how ordinary people, under certain pressures, can turn toward extraordinary violence. Philosophy of crime and evil. 2.1 Hobbes, Nietzsche, and Sartre on human nature. Philosophy asks, is crime a deviation or an extension of human nature? Thomas Hobbes famously claimed life in the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short, with humans driven by self-preservation. In Hobbes' view, laws restrain the beast inside us. Criminals, then, are those who defy or escape these restraints, revealing what lies beneath civilization's fragile veil. Nietzsche, however, argued that the will to power is the essence of life. Crime, in this sense, can be seen as a radical assertion of power against societal norms. Alex DeLarge in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange embodies this. His acts of ultraviolence are not about survival, but about domination, aestheticized destruction, and willful rebellion. Nietzsche might say Alex embodies the raw will unchecked by morality. Jean-Paul Sartre would interpret crime as an exercise of radical freedom. Every act is a choice, even one that denies morality. For Sartre, the criminal lives in bad faith. If they blame society, trauma, or biology for their actions, they must face the crushing reality that they chose freely to kill, steal, or destroy. Hannah Arendt complicates the conversation with her concept of the banality of evil. Observing Adolf Eichmann, she argued that evil can emerge not from demonic intent, but from thoughtless obedience. Crime, in this sense, can be disturbingly mundane, a bureaucrat stamping forms that lead to death. 2.2 Morality and Justification. Why do some criminals justify their acts? Revolutionaries, rebels, and terrorists often see crime not as evil, but as moral necessity. Breivik, chillingly, framed his massacre as political duty. In cinematic terms, consider V in V for Vendetta, who destroys buildings in the name of liberation. Philosophy forces us to ask, when does crime cross into justice, and when does justice mask crime? Debates rage between consequentialists, who measure morality by outcomes, and deontologists, who argue some acts, like murder, are wrong regardless of intention. Criminals often think consequentially, the ends justify the means, but history judges differently, transforming some criminals into freedom fighters and others into villains. Society and the criminal. 3.1 Poverty, Inequality, and Alienation. Sociology reveals crime as a mirror of inequality. Strain theory suggests that when legitimate paths to success are blocked through poverty, racism, or exclusion, individuals may turn to crime as an alternative route. Al Capone thrived in a prohibition America that created both opportunity and demand. Similarly, countless street-level crimes emerge from blocked economic mobility. In City of God, the Brazilian film depicting gangs in Rio's favelas, young boys grow into violent criminals not because they are born wicked, but because poverty and lack of opportunity leave crime as the only available future. Society manufactures its own criminals. 3.2 Labeling Theory. Howard Becker's labeling theory emphasizes that once a person is called a criminal, society's perception of them changes. This stigma can trap individuals in cycles of crime. Think of Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, condemned as a criminal even after trying to live honestly, forced by stigma back into conflict. This theory is confirmed by recidivism data. Prisoners released with criminal records face unemployment, discrimination, and social exclusion, often leading them back into the very behaviors they seek to escape. 3.3 Media and Romanticization. Modern society also glamorizes criminals. From The Godfather to Breaking Bad, audiences are drawn to figures who embody rebellion, power, and transgression. This fascination says less about the criminals themselves and more about us, the viewers who project suppressed desires onto fictional outlaws. The sociologist Emile Durkheim argued that crime serves a social function. It clarifies moral boundaries and unites societies in condemnation. Yet paradoxically, by obsessing over criminals, society also feeds them mythic status. We condemn while we secretly admire. The dark drama of human thought. 4.1. The inner dialogue of a criminal. Imagine the mind of a murderer standing over their victim. Do I stop here? Can I justify this? Will anyone ever know? Such inner dialogues, dramatized in Macbeth or Breaking Bad, reveal the gradual erosion of moral boundaries. Crime is rarely a sudden leap. It is often a slow crossing of invisible lines. Each justification builds upon the last until violence feels inevitable. Psychological studies of moral disengagement show how criminals silence their consciences through dehumanization of victims, displacement of responsibility, or euphemistic language. When a gangster speaks of taking care of business, the brutality is hidden behind words. 4.2. Free will vs. determinism. Neuroscience suggests biology shapes behavior, yet philosophy insists on freedom. This creates a paradox. Are criminals guilty if their brains are wired for violence? The case of Charles Whitman, the 1966 Texas sniper whose autopsy revealed a brain tumor pressing against his amygdala, remains chilling. Was it Whitman acting or his biology? Compatibilist philosophers argue that even if biology influences us, responsibility remains. Criminal justice systems grapple with this tension. The insanity defense, for instance, rests on the claim that some minds are too disordered to choose freely. Yet where do we draw the line? If genes, brain chemistry, and childhood trauma all shape behavior, who is ever entirely free? 4.3. Ordinary people and dark fantasies. Psychology shows that ordinary people harbor criminal fantasies, revenge, theft, even murder. Most never act on them, restrained by morality, fear of punishment, or empathy. Yet when morality erodes, ordinary people can commit atrocities. The Stanford prison experiment demonstrated how quickly average individuals, given power and anonymity, slid into cruelty. Cinema allows us to vicariously indulge these impulses. Watching Hannibal Lecter or Michael Corleone commit their acts gives us a glimpse of the forbidden without crossing the line ourselves. In this sense, film becomes a ritual where society both condemns and celebrates transgression. How people think about crimes. 5.1. Public opinion and punishment. Society's response to crime oscillates between vengeance and rehabilitation. In some cultures, the death penalty persists. In others, restorative justice prevails. The debate reflects our ambivalence. Do we punish criminals because they deserve it, or because we fear them? Retributivists argue justice demands punishment. Utilitarians argue punishment must reduce harm. Criminal justice policies often swing like a pendulum between these poles. The US, with its war on drugs, has leaned punitive, leading to mass incarceration. Scandinavian countries, by contrast, emphasize rehabilitation, producing far lower recidivism rates. 5.2. Fear and fascination. Crime terrifies because it exposes our vulnerability, but it fascinates because it expresses our hidden desires. True crime podcasts, documentaries, and films thrive because they allow society to confront danger safely through narrative distance. Audiences find catharsis in exploring the darkest scenarios without consequence. Neuroscientific studies show that exposure to crime stories activates the brain's fear centers and pleasure centers simultaneously. We are wired to recoil and lean closer at the same time. This dual reaction explains the cultural obsession with crime narratives. 5.3. The myth of the mastermind. Society often elevates criminals into mythic figures, masterminds, antiheroes, rebels. Whether it is Pablo Escobar in Narcos or Walter White in Breaking Bad, audiences consume these stories as modern tragedies. The myth of the criminal serves both as a warning and a secret thrill. But in reality, most criminals are not masterminds. They are desperate, impulsive, or trapped by circumstance. The cinematic myth both distorts and seduces, blurring the line between fascination and endorsement. The criminal inside us all. The criminal mind is not a distant alien force. It is an extension of human potential. Psychology explains it through disorders and trauma. Philosophy frames it as questions of power, morality, and freedom. Sociology shows us the structural forces that push people toward crime. And cinema dramatizes it all, holding up a mirror in which we see not only the criminal, but also ourselves. Every human harbors shadows, anger, envy, desire, impulses we repress in daily life. Criminals are those who cross the boundary we dare not. That is why their stories haunt us. They remind us that morality is fragile, that circumstance can twist virtue into vice, and that the line between citizen and criminal is thinner than we like to believe. When Hannibal Lecter leans forward and whispers, "We begin by coveting what we see every day," he is not just speaking to Clarice Starling. He is speaking to us. He is reminding us that the criminal inside is not a monster from another world. It is a reflection in the mirror, one choice, one temptation, one shadow away.